The city centre of Leeds, West Yorkshire 2013. Along with the engineering of Leeds into a relatively economic powerhouse, seems to have followed an almost identical pasting of all the traits usually found in the big financial centres like the City of London. However, it is in a much smaller area circling this city's railway station, after which it begins again to look more like a typically post-heavy industrial northern city and the Yorkshire town. Looking down towards the train station, January 2013. This small area of Leeds is probably the most powerful part of Yorkshire, a financial hub that has become the only hub of a discontinuous West Yorkshire sprawl that consists of over 2 million people, and it is an area that has more in common with the City of London than the landscape just a quarter of a mile either side to it. Other large nearby settlements, especially Bradford, which was once as prosperous as Leeds, have seen a gradual decline since their demise as industrial bases. Leeds is now often seen as the capital of Yorkshire. The speed of life in this colony island of the global financial empire is much faster than 10 minutes walk either way, which is why it seems so misplaced. There is an expectation to be met with tuts if you take your time. You have to run across the street after actually casually stepping out, because a car that in normal circumstances is a safe distance away advances towards you with the speed of a motorway slip road acceleration. Although I do find Leeds overwhelming due to the lack of time to acclimatise to the sudden big city feel, which seems to come out of nowhere amidst the older and softer looking Yorkshire settlements and hills, I do have some affinity to both it and Sheffield. Because my location in the old West Riding is exactly 14 miles both ways from Leeds and Sheffield, they both feel like my home big cities. Around 4 to 5 years ago, during the dawn of this current recession, I used to spend many days walking around the centre of Leeds City, listening to the analogue synthesizer pop by the likes of Kraftwerk and John Fox, dreaming of a future that never arrived, feeling that this music was made for this future. The pre-recession and staggered post-recession development in Leeds seems to cluster most heavily around the train station, as if the city were aggressively trying to prove itself to incomers on their arrival into the city. But if anything, the buildings loom over the visitor as they arrive, generating a sensation of pressure and intensity. Here is a recently built cylindrical red brick tower next to the station. Many people in nearby towns seem to have an unusual dislike for Leeds. I presume this is down to the notorious reputation of the fans of Leeds United Football Club, but also due to the peculiar concoction of bling, upmarket consumerism, hustle and bustle, and the murmuring aggression of a small town identity that has found itself inside a big financial city. They all come together due to the centre's quite inhumane urban geography. Leeds, 2008. The Leeds Wall of Fame, minus the late Jimmy Savile, January 2013. The gap left here indicated to me that the photo had been hastily removed during the eruption of the child sex scandals involving the deceased Leeds-born television presenter. This is housing condemned to be demolished in the Little London area of Leeds, spring 2010. This This is one of the very upmarket clothes shops you find around the centre, around the Victoria Quarter. This was in spring 2010. In an introduction to the critique of urban geography, Guy Debord writes how sudden change of ambience in a street within the space of a few metres, the evident division of a city into zones of distinct psychic atmospheres, the path of least resistance that is automatically followed in aimless strolls and which has no relation to the physical contour of the terrain, the appealing or repelling character of certain places. This quote comes to mind around the centre of Leeds, where one can find themselves placed in a very different frame of mind from one street to another. Some streets have an air of frustration, on others one is confronted with brash brands and high street charity workers, and these such streets when one initially feels at ease in the atmospheric numbness, only to begin to feel like an outsider or even criminal due to one's inability to afford the goods. A closed fairground ride, Leeds Market, 2010. Just 2 minutes walk from the Victoria Quarter. Homelessness in Leeds, January 2013. Every time I'm in the centre of Leeds, the amount of visible homelessness always shocks me. This small area in the centre has become a financial hub, and with it, all the traits of a global city: great wealth next to great poverty, ill-fitting to the actual size of the city borough. You do wonder where these people could have all possibly come from, as it looks too extreme. Without forgetting the suffering such an existence must create, it does often look like a stage set of a typical city scene, an hyper-real cityscape, which could explain why people find it so easy to be indifferent to others suffering in such areas. Looking towards recently built private apartments, early 2009. An housing estate to the west of Leeds city centre, spring 2010. Leeds train station, late 2009. Possibly the most bustling place in the whole of Yorkshire, the station shows how the centre of Leeds now has far more in common with central London and other global financial centres than the neighbouring town and city centres. The station is also possibly the greatest and most factory-like station in the area. I have always classed Wakefield as my second town, living 8 miles from its centre but 4 miles from the centre of Barnsley. Wakefield is more or less two different towns messily stitched together. Arriving from Leeds at the Wakefield Westgate station, Wakefield seems to be, if anything, a suburb of Leeds, and seems to owe its ascendancy to what Leeds has become. This seems to be in an almost identical manner to the relationship towns such as St Albans, Reading and Stevenage have to London. This could well be because Wakefield is the only stop the mainline train line from London makes in West Yorkshire on its way to Leeds, which is so important in the commuter age, which shrieks at the sight of snow on the tracks. In fact, what has become more evident since the observant eyes of the southerner Owen Offenfley pointed out in his book The New Ruins of Great Britain is that Wakefield feels like a southern city, for which he did instantly offer his apologies. But if you look at the towns served by the East Coast Railway from London to Leeds, they all have a similar feel to them. All commuter towns, and they reek of modern industry, which to inhabitants of the more declined old industrial areas of the north looks like the south. But there again, this beating organ dependent on the beating heart that is Leeds is only really one half of Wakefield. One half of the city is this aforementioned town, served by the suits and ties populating Wakefield Westgate station, but the other half is the remnants of a former heavy industries town, culturally closer to Barnsley or Castleford than the other half of the town, served by the incredibly neglected Wakefield Kirkgate station, in a side of town that is full of sad sights, especially once the night draws in. Kirkgate, Wakefield, 2013. Snow on pavements can often be an indicator of what type of society we have. A commuter nation, one dominated by finance and customer service industries, which has dragged more and more of us into an endless commute. Car ownership and intercity trains are what matter. The local area means little, and as long as the main transport arteries are cleared of snow, not much attention is given to pedestrians struggling to walk down often treacherous pavements. This area has to be one of the most neglected entrances via train into a city in the UK. The entire built environment, from the station via the subway to the centre, seems almost built to intimidate. The series of dual carriageway roads that separate this area from the new critically acclaimed Hepworth Gallery make sure their environments never need mix, meaning the renovation of Kirkgate isn't too essential to the Hepworth, as long as the gallery goers don't need to pass through it. Until I got to high school, I never really saw myself as a Barnsley lad. Just saw myself as being from Yorkshire. As a young child, my mother used to take me to Wakefield as much as Barnsley. Only at secondary school did the quite strong cultural identity that Barnsley has become attached to my own identity. Wakefield Kirkgate and that area left a lasting mental impression on me of what an urban area looks like. When I think of that area, I still think of the greyness and all the concrete. The future being killed by the past. Wakefield City Centre, pre-2010 general election. A nightclub, Westgate, Wakefield, January 2013. Like Wellington Street in Barnsley, Westgate has a reputation of drunk and disorderly behaviour by night. People come from all over this borough of 300,000 people for a night out at the weekend. Although the need for a weekly alcoholic lobotomising in our town centres has been half killed by the recession and continually increasing prices of alcohol as an oversimplistic government attempt to prevent binge drinking, it still plays a massive role in a British culture that has known less and less what to do with itself as the rhetoric of there being no future beyond this capitalist quagmire becomes more and more entrenched. Needless to say, Wakefield does seem to have something going for it quite now, possibly down to the needless construction of the outdoor shopping centre Trinity Walk, but also the city being home to two international sculpture galleries, the Epworth and the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which surely do deserve their place here, with two of the most accredited sculptors of the 20th century originating from the borough. They have also generated a relatively large artistic culture in the city. An Asda hypermarket at Wakefield 2013. The Asda company began just up the road in Leeds in the mid-20th century, and for some time only really had stores in the north. Today it is part of the Walmart chain, one of the world's largest corporations. Brands clamp themselves to your mind from an early age, making you associate with them whether you like it or not. I always got excited about going to Wakefield Asda as a child. Asda Day was the best day of the week, getting all those sweet goods in. As I grew older and became more aware of this environmental and socio-political consequences of living in a consumerist society, this excitement slowly turned into dread. Yet throughout this, the brand association persisted, making for a bittersweet feeling of both familiarity and estrangement, trust and distrust. The nearby ruins of Sandal Castle, a medieval castle, also used to be a favoured place to visit as a child. Running up and down the steep grassy verges that used to be the moats, the castle is more historically known for the Battle of Wakefield in the year 1460, during the War of the Roses. Hall Green, January 2013. Just a few miles over the hills from the scattered suburbs of Barnsley, the village is very similar to the Barnsley villagers, yet orientated towards the city of Wakefield. It is actually the beginnings of what Owen Atherley, in his book The New Ruins of Great Britain, calls a hypothetical West Riding metropolis. Notable because most of the buses that serve Hall Green don't terminate at the nearest centre Wakefield, but carry on to the main hub, Leeds. There are probably well over 3 million people living within a 20-mile radius of this village. Yet like my own village of Kexborough over the hill, it still feels like a neglected place, a council estate where many are left increasingly stranded. Abandoned house between Woolley and Hall Green, January 2013. Despite logic telling me that nobody in their right mind will be occupying an abandoned building with no windows on a very cold winter's day, I still didn't have the guts to venture further from the spot where I took this photograph. The house was next door to an house with a large black car and a dog that I thought I heard barking. I was nervous about getting on the wrong side of whoever owned that property. Cowardice won again. The house is situated in a brief but sparsely populated area which separates the continuity of the West Yorkshire settlements with the South Yorkshire settlements that begin with Barnsley, spread to the former mining communities of the Dearne Valley, into Rotherham, then joins up with the city of Sheffield. Its location in this sparse spot is the only reason I can think of as to why this house hasn't been boarded up,
in a time when properties are usually instantaneously boarded up to prevent people living in them without paying.